Daniel Harper used to believe life followed a simple rhythm. You worked hard, loved your family, and time rewarded you with quiet, ordinary happiness. For him, that happiness had a name, Emily. His daughter had a laugh that filled rooms and a way of holding his hand that made the world feel manageable, even on its worst days. She was small, curious, endlessly talkative, and she trusted him with the kind of faith only children give their parents. When Emily was diagnosed with leukemia, Daniel told himself it would be a chapter, not the ending. He learned new words in sterile hospital rooms, memorized medication schedules, and smiled when doctors spoke, even when fear sat heavy in his chest. He slept on uncomfortable chairs beside her bed, listening to machines hum through the night, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Emily was brave in a way that humbled him. On days when the treatments made her weak, she would still ask about school, about her friends, about when they could go back to the park. Sometimes she would squeeze his hand and say, "It's okay, Daddy, I'm not scared." Daniel would turn away so she wouldn't see the tears. The end came quietly. No dramatic alarms, no sudden rush of doctors. Just a stillness that settled into the room like an unwelcome guest. Emily's breathing slowed, her hand loosened in his, and then she was gone. Daniel sat there long after, unable to move, afraid that if he stood up, the truth would become permanent. After the funeral, people told him time would heal. They brought food, spoke softly, and avoided saying Emily's name as if it might break him. When the house emptied and the silence returned, Daniel realized something frightening. Time wasn't healing anything. It was simply moving on without him. Emily's room remained untouched. Her backpack still hung on the chair, her drawings taped to the wall. Daniel would stand in the doorway some nights, unable to step inside, afraid that touching anything might erase what little remained of her. Sleep became difficult. Mornings felt pointless. He went through the motions of work, conversations, meals, all of it hollow. The park became his refuge. It was the same park where he and Emily had spent countless Sundays feeding birds and watching clouds. He started going there in the evenings, sitting on the same bench, staring at the same path. He didn't expect comfort there. He only needed somewhere to exist where his grief didn't feel so loud. One evening, as autumn settled into the city, Daniel sat with his coat pulled tight around him. Leaves scattered across the ground, crunching under passing footsteps. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, lost in thought, when a small shadow appeared beside him. "Sir?" Daniel looked up slowly. A young boy stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He couldn't have been more than 7. His jacket was too thin for the weather, and his hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in days. "Yes?" Daniel replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Are you waiting for someone too?" The boy asked. Daniel hesitated. "No," he said gently. "I'm just sitting." The boy nodded, as if that made sense, and sat down beside him without asking. Daniel was surprised, but didn't protest. There was something about the boy's quiet confidence, the way he looked at the path ahead as if expecting it to answer him. "My mom is lost," the boy said after a moment. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Lost? She didn't come back," the boy explained. "People say she won't, but they don't know everything." Daniel swallowed. "What's your name?" "Ethan. I'm Daniel." They sat in silence again. Daniel expected questions or tears or restlessness. Instead, Ethan simply stared ahead, his hands folded in his lap. "My mom used to bring me here," Ethan continued. "She said if you wait long enough, good things find you." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Emily had said something similar once, on a day when the rain had ruined their plans. He felt the familiar ache rise in his chest. "How long have you been waiting?" Daniel asked. Ethan shrugged. "A while." Daniel wanted to ask more, but he didn't. Some stories revealed themselves when they were ready. When Ethan finally stood up, he smiled politely and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." As if it were already decided. Daniel watched him walk away, a strange feeling settling over him. He told himself it was nothing. Just a child. Just a conversation. And yet the bench felt colder once Ethan was gone. The next evening, Ethan returned. And the evening after that. Some days they talked. Other days they didn't. Daniel learned that Ethan liked drawing and hated math. Ethan learned that Daniel once fixed old radios as a hobby. They never spoke directly about their losses, but it hovered between them. Unspoken and understood. Daniel began bringing an extra bottle of water. Then a sandwich. Ethan accepted them without embarrassment, as if this too was part of the routine. Daniel noticed the boy's shoes were worn, the solace thinning. He wondered where Ethan went after leaving the park, but he didn't ask. Not yet. One evening, as the sky darkened earlier than usual, Ethan handed Daniel a piece of folded paper. Inside was a drawing of a man and a little girl holding hands, standing under a tree. "That's my mom," Ethan said, pointing to the taller figure. Daniel nodded. "She looks kind." "She is," Ethan said confidently. Then, after a pause, he pointed to the smaller figure. "That's me." Daniel traced the lines gently with his finger. He wanted to tell Ethan about Emily, about her drawings, about how she used to color outside the lines. Instead he said, "It's very good." Ethan smiled, proud. As weeks passed, Daniel noticed something unsettling. He laughed more. Not loudly, not freely, but enough to surprise himself. The heaviness didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. For the first time since Emily's death, Daniel felt moments that didn't hurt. One afternoon, Ethan asked, "Do you miss someone?" Daniel considered lying. Then he shook his head. "Yes, very much." "My mom too," Ethan said. "Sometimes I forget what her voice sounds like." Daniel felt his eyes burn. "I'm sorry." Ethan shrugged. "It's okay." She said memories live in strange places. That night, Daniel stood in Emily's doorway longer than usual. He finally stepped inside. He sat on the edge of her bed, holding her teddy bear, and cried not the silent tears he had mastered, but deep, broken sobs. When he finished, he felt exhausted, but lighter. The next day, Daniel made a decision that scared him. He invited Ethan to come by his house sometime. Ethan looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Okay," he said simply. Daniel didn't know what the future held. He only knew that for the first time in a long while, he wasn't entirely alone. And somewhere between the quiet park bench and a child's steady presence, something inside him had begun to wake up again. Daniel woke early the next morning, a strange mixture of anticipation and dread twisting in his chest. He had never invited anyone into his home since Emily's passing. Her room had remained a shrine, untouched, and the rest of the house had grown quiet around it. The thought of Ethan stepping inside made Daniel acutely aware of how fragile he still felt, how raw the absence of his daughter was. Yet there was something about the boy's presence that made him want to try, to let life seep back in, even in the smallest way. Ethan arrived precisely at the time Daniel had imagined he would. Little backpack slung over one shoulder, hands tucked into his pockets, cheeks flushed from the crisp morning air. He paused at the threshold, eyes wide as he took in the house. Daniel, standing behind him, saw the hesitation and knew exactly how the boy felt. He felt the same the first time he had entered Emily's bedroom after she was gone. He stepped forward, opening his arms slightly. "It's okay," he said softly. "You can come in." Ethan walked slowly, his gaze flicking from one corner to another, taking in the quiet, the smell of the home. The faint scent of lavender lingering from candles Daniel sometimes lit to remember. Emily. Daniel noticed the careful way Ethan's steps avoided the creaking floorboards, the gentle, almost reverent manner in which he observed the furniture. It was as though he understood the gravity of the space without needing to speak it aloud. They started in the living room, sitting on the worn sofa. Daniel poured a glass of juice for Ethan, while he took a coffee for himself. The boy's eyes darted around constantly, but when they met Daniel's, they held steady, curious but unafraid. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Your house. It feels different," he said quietly, not in judgment, but simply as an observation. Daniel smiled faintly, a ghost of the warmth he once carried. "It's been quiet for a long time," he admitted. "Emily used to fill it with noise, laughter. Chaos mostly, but I'd give anything to hear that chaos again." Ethan nodded, as if understanding perfectly. "My mom? She used to be loud too. She sang in the kitchen and sometimes danced while cooking. I liked it when she did that. He paused, then added, I miss her. Daniel's throat tightened and he looked away for a moment. He hadn't realized how ready he was to let someone in to share the weight of this emptiness, someone who might not even know the full depth of his grief, but could still touch it. I understand, he whispered. I miss my daughter too. Every day. The air between them felt softer after that. Daniel reached for a small box tucked behind the couch, a collection of Emily's old drawings and crafts. He handed it to Ethan. I thought maybe you'd like to see some of her art, he said. Ethan's eyes lit up, and he carefully flipped through the pages, examining each one as though they were treasures. He pointed to a drawing of a tree with bright red leaves. Did she draw this? He asked. She did, Daniel replied. She loved trees. She used to say they were like quiet guardians of the world. He watched Ethan study the lines and colors with fascination. There was no sound, just the quiet rustle of pages and the occasional exclamation of wonder from the boy. In that moment, Daniel realized something remarkable. Here was someone who could appreciate Emily in a way even he sometimes couldn't. Because he was too tangled in the grief to see the beauty, after a while Daniel led Ethan to Emily's room. The boy hesitated at the door, his small hand resting against the frame. It's okay, Daniel said softly. You can come in. Inside, Ethan's eyes widened. The room was exactly as Daniel had left it. The bed with the teddy bear, the small desk with scattered colored pencils, the little bookshelf with worn spines. Everything seemed frozen in time, yet it didn't feel oppressive. Ethan walked slowly, touching the edge of the bed gently, then picking up a small figurine from the shelf. She loved this? He asked. She did, Daniel said. Everything here belonged to her. He paused, then added, and now, it belongs to both of us. Ethan looked up, puzzled. Daniel gestured for him to sit on the edge of the bed. I want you to know something, he said. Emily was very special. She was kind, brave, and full of laughter. And even though she isn't here, some of her joy, her spirit, it stays with me. And now, with you here, it feels like it's growing again. Ethan's expression softened. He didn't fully understand, but he felt the truth of it. He had spent so long carrying the idea of being without his mother that opening himself to someone else's loss felt dangerous. But here, in this room, it felt safe. He nodded quietly, placing the teddy bear in his lap. I'll take care of her, bear, he whispered. Daniel reached over and gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I know you will. They spent the afternoon talking, sharing stories of Emily and Ethan's mother. The words were careful, measured, but they carried weight. Daniel learned that Ethan's mother had been a painter, someone who filled rooms with color and light. He shared memories of Emily's stubborn streak, her love for clouds, her habit of leaving small notes for him in the morning. They laughed softly at the similarities, and sometimes the quiet ache in their hearts was so strong it almost made speaking impossible. Yet they stayed together, filling the space with a new rhythm neither had anticipated. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Ethan developed routines. Daniel would read to Ethan, sometimes from books Emily had loved, sometimes stories he made up on the spot. Ethan, in turn, drew pictures for Daniel, sketches of their small adventures in the park, of leaves falling, of imaginary worlds they created together. Each evening ended the same way. Ethan would leave, promising to return the next day, and Daniel would stand at the door, watching him walk down the street, a part of him feeling lighter. Yet still aware of the absence that remained, Daniel began to notice subtle changes in himself. He no longer recoiled from Emily's room. He could sit there for hours, sometimes just holding her drawings, sometimes laughing softly at the memories they evoked. The house, once silent and oppressive, began to feel warm again, infused with the sound of their shared presence, their tentative laughter, the quiet conversations that threaded through the walls. One evening, as Daniel was making tea, Ethan asked, Do you think people come back in other ways? Even if they're gone? He sounded hopeful but uncertain. Daniel looked at him, understanding the weight behind the question. Yes, he said after a pause. I think they do. Sometimes not in the way we expect, but they find ways to stay with us, to remind us of what we love, and to help us keep going. Ethan nodded solemnly, then brightened a little. Like you and me? He asked. Daniel smiled. Exactly like us. The seasons shifted, and with each passing day, Daniel felt the slow, steady return of something he had thought lost forever. Not Emily herself, of course. He could never replace his daughter, and he never wanted to. But the boy's presence, the quiet, steady companionship, reminded him that grief was not the end. It could coexist with joy, with laughter, with life still unfolding in unexpected ways. One afternoon, as they sat under the same tree where Daniel had first met Ethan in the park, the boy turned to him. "Do you think she would like me?" he asked. "Emily, I mean—" Daniel laughed softly, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "She would have loved you," he said. "She would have liked how brave you are, how kind you are. I think she'd be proud." Ethan smiled, leaning back against the tree trunk. "I think she is proud," he said softly. Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes. It was a bittersweet truth, but one he could finally hold without feeling crushed. For the first time in a long while, the world seemed not entirely empty, not entirely cold. There was space for warmth, for connection, for hope. One rainy day, Daniel brought an umbrella for both of them and walked with Ethan to the park. They splashed in puddles and laughed, letting the rain soak their hair and clothes. Daniel marveled at how freeing it felt to move again, to allow himself joy without guilt, to let the past and the present exist together in harmony. Ethan's laughter reminded him of Emily's in ways he hadn't dared to hope for when they returned home. Ethan picked up Emily's teddy bear and handed it to Daniel. "For keeping safe," he said. Daniel took it gently, realizing that in giving the boy a reason to care, he had found a reason to live again. Not to replace what he had lost, but to honor it, to carry it forward in moments of connection, love, and simple human joy. Months passed. Daniel no longer feared being alone in the house. He found small comforts in cooking and reading and sharing the quiet with Ethan on Sunday mornings. They would walk to the park, feed the birds, watch the clouds. Daniel sometimes caught himself smiling freely, and it shocked him each time. He realized it was okay to be happy, to let someone new into his life without feeling that he was betraying the memory of his daughter. Ethan's presence slowly transformed Daniel's days from hollow repetitions into moments of warmth and significance. The quiet grief still lingered, a soft shadow at the edges of his life, but it no longer defined him. He had learned that love was not finite, that the heart could stretch to hold both sorrow and joy. Absence and presence, memory and new beginnings. One evening, as Daniel tucked Ethan in after reading a story, the boy asked, "Do you think she knows I came today?" Daniel understood immediately. "Yes," he whispered. "She knows. And she's happy we're taking care of each other." Ethan smiled, closing his eyes. Daniel stood by the doorway for a long moment.